Okay, here we are again. I'm one of those people that I think I'm done with something, but then other ideas pop into my head, and I'm back here again. Well, it's not really ideas that pop into my head for this one. It's mostly just you saw in the last video, it was a half complete idea, half complete ship, and seeing it, especially the bottom, just sitting there empty, bugged me to no end. So here it is. I went through and sat down and actually put stuff in the bottom to kind of represent an idea of what the finished product might look like. As I said before, you got the transparent dome here in the front for viewing. You have an elevator that's attached with some cables and a docking port that goes up to the surface to take you back up. So that the idea is so you can park the sub on the bottom. It'll have a shaped flat system of drop weights that will provide a significant amount of the weight that keeps the submarine submerged. Ideally, you'll have some kind of lever pull or something, have some kind of system that'll allow the drop weights to fall so that when you drop them, you float back up to the surface. But those will also be flat so that the submarine can sit on the bottom. There'll be a cable system that attaches to this basically buoy, but it's going to be a big enough buoy that you can come in and sit down. I only rendered the bench on the one side. There'll be another bench on the other side, and people will come and sit here, and it'll elevate to the surface. You'll have a motor in here, and also probably an inflatable dinghy of some kind, either in here or maybe attached to the top. This rear buoy over here is sort of like a towed sonar array for regular military submarines, but for this one, it actually floats up towards the surface, and it would have a snorkel on the top of it that runs an umbilical down to here to run in, provide air circulation and air for the engines when they're running. You can tow it back in when you just want to be on battery power. Kitchen area, wet dry area for scuba gear and any other like wet stuff. Maybe you would store the dinghy stuff in here when you're not in there. I don't know. This you would climb down out of the elevator into here, and this would be the area that gets all wet and stuff. So I kind of kept it open. Individual crew cabins or kids, if you're rich and you have a family and you're doing this for whatever reason. Dual bathrooms, master cabin for the captain, engine room back here that has the electric motor that runs the propeller, diesel electric setup that then runs back to batteries, which I've rendered here. For this cutaway that I have here, just because you don't see something doesn't mean it's not there. This would have a set of tanks lining the wall here. Now, I'll talk about that in a second. That's probably not realistic. I'm not really sure how all of that works. This is just a visual representation of how I kind of see the mechanicals of all of this working. Set of battery banks in the middle here, kind of as low down into the ship as we can get them. 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't put them here because you wouldn't be able to see anything. And then yeah. The cockpit up here would have extensive seating so that when you're looking at something that's interesting, everybody can kind of be hanging out in the chairs. You have the pilot right here controlling everything from the front. I think that's it for that. So the reason I wanted to make a video out of this is because I wanted to talk about the tank system here. Obviously, I've used some pressure vessels to represent this, but I'm not 100% sure that that's how it works. Getting information on submarines is a little bit difficult because there's a lot of classified stuff still, especially about the more modern nuclear ones. It's very hard to get like construction related information about those kinds of things. So I am kind of curious to know if no, it is not. Okay. My suspicion is that because there are valves in so my understanding when it comes to nuclear submarines and most of the modern submarines is that there are open vents at the top, and there's open grates at the bottom, and then there's vents at the top that allow you to vent air out. And then when you're ready to dive, you open the vents, water rushes into the main ballast tanks, which just become completely flooded, and then when you're ready to surface again, you have compressed air that you force back into that space. It forces the water back out through the bottom and closes that off. But the grates themselves pretty much stay open all of the time, and you're just relying on air pressure to keep the water from rushing in. For this particular design, I don't know how well that would work because we're not going to have an exterior hull to use as like a ballast tank kind of thing where you have, because I believe that most of the I believe that most of the more modern stuff there's a superstructure around the pressure vessel itself, and so you'll have space in between the pressure vessel and the actual superstructure exterior, and that's where you would have things like ballast tanks and things like that. Well, we're trying to keep this one as simple as possible, so my suspicion is that you would have to have some kind of pressure safe tanks inside this part of the hull here. Or I would imagine maybe it's possible to have valves in the bottom instead of open grates. You open the valves to let the water in, and maybe you have some hose. Maybe you have some hose, some piping that goes up to the top and to make this work like a regular ballast tank. You would just have to reroute things instead of having just an open space or whatever. So this is just something that you would have to have a nautical engineer, somebody who knows something about submarines, to take this vague concept and turn it into something that's actually workable. But I didn't want to end the submarine thing on a half-assed, I didn't put things in there because I didn't feel like it note. This is a little bit more representative of what the final product might look like, aside from the fact that obviously, we have these. Now, the other thing about this is I made a comment in the last video about how fuel is an issue for, long distance kind of things. And ideally, this kind of a setup here would actually solve some of that. You might not be able to make all of these tanks fuel tanks, but my understanding is that back during the diesel submarine era, they would actually use their ballast tanks as fuel storage, or at least some of their ballast tanks as fuel storage, and they would actually mix the diesel with the seawater because they would put the diesel and the seawater in the same tanks because once everything's settled and everything kind of went back the way that it was supposed to be, the diesel would float to the top because it's lighter than the water, and the seawater would settle to the bottom. And as long as you're not jostling it around a lot, it's not going to mix. So you just kind of suck out the diesel from the top, and as long as the tank is staying full, there'll always be diesel right there where you need to pull it in. And then when you run out of diesel in that tank, it's replaced by water, and that kind of works. So ideally, you'll start out with full diesel tanks, right? And then as you use up your diesel, you're letting you're pulling in more and more water to replace the volume of fuel that you used to keep the tanks full and keep the weight on the ship, and then also B, to keep the diesel fuel constantly pushed up towards the top because you're pushing up from the bottom with the seawater. So obviously it would require much more thought and consideration, and you need some kind of main ballast tanks because you don't want the submarine sinking once you put all your diesel fuel on there. That's not going to work. So there would have to be some combination of, some of these are dedicated to just main ballast, and then some of them are dedicated to fuel that becomes replaced with water to replace the fuel that you're lost. And then you need some trim tanks, probably some really forward and aft trim tanks, and maybe left and right trim tanks, or maybe you could shuffle some things around for left and right, but especially for forward and back, or you could shuffle all of this around. But I would imagine some of these tanks would need to be dedicated to only ballast, because you need to be able to resurface, and you don't want to have to drop the weights to do that. You want to have some kind of equilibrium there. So if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. If submarine concepts are completely foreign to you, there's way too much to go into on how submarines work for me to give you a quick primer on that right now. You're gonna have to go learn about neutral buoyancy and how ballast tanks work and things like that. I'm certainly not an expert on it. I just have enough of an understanding to kind of put something like this together. A real submarine designer, or anybody who knows anything about submarines, is certainly going to look at these tanks and be like, "That's not how it works." I understand that's not how it works. This is just kind of my visual representation of what these compartments would be dedicated to. And then, we'd have to come up with a way of actually, filling them with water. So I did go ahead and add a little walking path here. I also added some raised areas on the bottom to kind of simulate opening and closing of sealed hatches so that you could seal off these compartments when you need to. So the walking area along the middle part here is now closer to 6 feet, but not quite. You'll still have to kind of crouch down as you run through the compartment here. Ideally, this area here, this main area where you enter in, will have some way of getting down into this compartment here, so that you can walk forward to get to the cockpit, and also walk backwards to get to the bottom of the aft end of the vessel, especially the engine room back here. The master bedroom will not have any kind of access to the engine room. It's a big compartment here that's just for the owner / captain / whoever's the most important person on the boat gets the big room, and then everyone else gets a small one. And then, yeah, for some kind of a research vessel or whatever, you'd find space to put cots or whatever for, you know, however much crew you need to put on here. But yeah, as I said in the last episode, at 15 feet wide, we are about half the size of a standard, you know, military-sized attack submarine. A Los Angeles class submarine is 33 feet wide. The Virginia class submarines that we have right now are about 33 feet wide. This whole thing is almost 100 feet long. So this version of my idea is less a yacht kind of thing and more of a super. I don't know. When do you start hopping into the super yacht size of things? But I don't know. I think that this probably right here is a much more livable solution. I think that if you really wanted to, you could get rid of this section here, which would take off a good 8 feet. Maybe get rid of this section here, move this forward, and use the kitchen area as kind of your wet dry area. That would shave off a good 16 feet and reduce the overall cost. But then you have to shift things around, and, you know, I think this might be, for something of this size, I think this might be about as small as you're going to get it, and still have enough of a width to be able to put a central corridor down the middle and have enough room on the sides for cabins and other things along the side here. So, yep, that's my update. Ideally, this is my final update. I keep saying that, but then I start tinkering with things and I get other ideas in my head, and it's easy enough for me to just sit down and do a rendering of it, and then if I'm going to sit down and do a rendering, I might as well make a video. We got a little playlist going now, so whatever. As I said in my previous video, I know there's a lot of space in between the bulkheads here. Obviously, you would want to put some kind of stiffening rings at certain intervals along to just stiffen out the edge of the hull here. So I know some people are going to comment on that. I have no idea how much battery power would be needed to run this for any decent length of time. I also had a thought that for the taper to get down to where the propeller is, it might make more sense to have a much shorter big pressure vessel here, and then get another smaller one, maybe something this size, and attach it to the rear of it. So like let's say you take off the engine, push the end of this forward here, so now the pressure vessel's here, right? And then you have another one of these, and you stick it onto the end here, and then all of the engine components and stuff go in here. And then you can have another set of these superstructure things coming from this part here down to this part here, and then another smaller set coming down to this part here. That'll make it so you don't have to have a really long engine shaft like I have on this one. It'll push the motor itself closer to where the propeller is. So I may do a rendering of that. I don't know. I don't know. Because to do that, I would have to completely because the whole point would be to make the overall craft shorter, and I don't know. I'm actually kind of curious, since I'm just sitting here right now. Let's just measure this. Hold on. Endpoint to endpoint. That's about 19 feet, and right now we're at about, yeah, it's about that now. 15 some odd feet. So yeah, if you put a bulk a port, some kind of a docking thing here, attached it and made it to where these were kind of joined together in a safe way that connects them, and then you have a superstructure piece going from this part to this part, and then another little smaller shaft holding the propeller here. But whatever, all of this is kind of, I'm using stock parts or just custom created pieces that I've made to try to make this something that sort of makes sense. As I say in every video, this idea is completely insane. It's something that I would do if I had the money to do it, but I don't have the money to do it, so it remains here in the realm of fantasy of something that would be really cool to do if I could figure out how to do it. So anyways, enough of that. I just wanted to give you guys the last, hopefully last update of this submarine idea that I have. If you guys have any feedback or thoughts on it, I'm always open to changes, but ideally this is the last version of it. So thanks for watching. Be sure to click the like button, subscribe to help us reach 10,000 subscribers. Join as a member if you'd like early access to videos, among other perks, or you can just leave YouTube's version of a tip with the thanks button. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the submarine. Be sure to come back for our next video, and I'll see you then.